comprehensive clinical class by the White Army. Today, we have an ophthalmology case presentation on cataract. Our mentor is Dr. Vidya ma'am. We are blessed to have you with us, ma'am. Ma'am is an assistant professor at BMCRI Bengaluru and she's working at the Minto Eye Hospital. Ma'am, we welcome you to this session.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here too.
Thank you, ma'am. I would now like to introduce our presenter for today. Our presenter is Miss Varsha RB, third year MBBS from JJMC Devangiri. Welcome, Varsha.
Thank you, ma'am.
Without further delay, with ma'am's kind permission, let us begin the session.
Yes, please.
Yes. A very good evening to all. I am Varsha from JJ Medical College, and I'm very happy to be here presenting the case on cataract. So here, next slide. So here is a patient named, here's a male patient named XYZ, aged 80 years, former by occupation from Davangere, of lower middle class socioeconomic status according to modified region classification, examined on 4th October 2021. Has come with chief complaints of progressively diminishing vision in both eyes since 1 year. And history of presenting illness is patient was apparently normal 1 year ago. Then he developed diminished vision in both eyes, and it was insidious in onset, gradually progressive in nature. And the history of diminution of vision was present in both bright and dim light, and was same for distant and near object, and it was associated with glare. And it was the diminution of vision, it was not associated with pain, redness, headache, or watery eye. There was no history of trauma or exposure to radiation, and there was no history of colored halos or black spots, and there was no history of uniocular diplopia. And ocular history, there was no history of previous surgery to either the right eye or the left eye. And patient past history, patient is a known case of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and is on medication, but he is not a known case of diabetes mellitus or hypertension. And personal history, diet is mixed and appetite was adequate, and the sleep pattern was normal. Bowel and bladder habits were unaltered, and habits, there is a substance abuse of tobacco is present, that is smokes 1 pack of BD every day, per day. And family history, nothing significant. Summary, an 80-year-old male farmer, known case of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, has presented with the symptoms of gradual painless loss of vision in both eyes since 1 year with no previous ocular surgery.
Okay, can we go back to the first slide?
Sure, ma'am.
Okay, I'm sure all of you are aware why we ask for demographic data. So I'll skip this slide. Okay, we'll go to chief complaints. Okay, so the patient has come to you with diminution of vision in both eyes since 1 year.
Yes, ma'am.
So in your chief complaints, you can just say diminution of vision. Progressively and all these adjectives we can use when we're eliciting further history. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Can we move on to the next slide? Okay. Tell me, what are the causes for diminution of vision?
Ma'am, diminution of vision can be divided into gradual or sudden, and it can be associated with pain, or there might be no pain. So causes of gradual painless loss of vision includes cataract and glaucoma, open angle, primary open angle glaucoma, or it might be because of refractory errors, and it might be because of corneal opacity, and gradual painful loss of vision. Painful loss of vision may be seen in case of
Okay. So here's the thing, okay. Most of the times in a clinical scenario, we are either going to see gradual painless loss of vision, okay,
yes,
sudden painless loss of vision,
yes,
or painful loss of vision.
yes,
All right. So where all do you see? As you said, so Most commonly, refractive errors cause gradual painless
loss of vision.
cataract is one of the causes, open angle glaucoma. What you left out is any posterior segment pathologies. All right. So in this patient, we are talking about an 80-year-old male, right? So in an 80-year-old male, what can be like one other important cause of gradual painless diminution of vision noticed over a period of 5 months or 1 year or whatever?
Ma'am, since he is a farmer, we can consider pterygium.
Okay. Anything else? Any posterior segment? I'm looking for
retinal,
something to do with the retina, something to do with the macula. Have you heard of age-related? Have you heard of age-related macular degeneration? ARMD.
Yes,
okay. ARMD. So keeping this patient's age in mind. Okay, so he's an 80-year-old. So another very important or a commonly encountered cause is age-related macular degeneration. Okay. I presume he's not a diabetic. Okay, so if he were a diabetic, okay, another thing,
diabetic retinopathy.
It could be diabetic retinopathy or even diabetic maculopathy.
Yes.
Okay, so you said it was insidious in onset. So more than instead of saying developed diminution of vision, like I usually prefer to say that he noticed 1 year ago. He was apparently normal 1 year ago, and then he noticed diminished vision in both eyes, which was gradually progressive, insidious in onset, gradually progressive. Okay. What are the causes for diminution of vision in bright light? What are the causes of diminution of vision in dim light?
Ma'am, in cases of bright light, of course, again, because of cataract, if there is opacity present in the central part, that causes diminution of vision in bright light.
Okay, so can you name any particular anatomical type of cataract that can cause diminution of vision in bright light?
Ma'am, galactosemic cataract and cataract due to blunt trauma and cataract caused.
Frequently, what do we encounter? I said based on the anatomical location. Can you tell me?
Yes, ma'am. Senile posterior subcapsular cataract.
Very good. So any posterior subcapsular cataract, posterior polar cataract can cause diminution of vision in bright light. Why does it cause diminution of vision in bright light?
Ma'am, because in bright light there is constriction of pupil and the light rays.
The axial and paraxial rays are cut off.
Yes, axial and paraxial rays.
Right. Okay. Yes. What are the causes of diminution of vision in dim light? What types of cataract can cause diminution of vision in dim light? Or what type of cataract will cause difficulty in vision when there is dim light?
Ma'am, in case of corticular cataract, that is cuneiform cataract, we have loss of vision in dim light.
Okay. Anything else? Your posterior subcapsular cataract itself can cause trouble in dim light. Okay, so what does your posterior subcapsular cataract do? It causes glare, it causes scattering of light. So even in dim light, posterior subcapsular cataract can cause diminished vision. One more other common complaint that a person with posterior subcapsular cataract can complain of.
Difficulty in driving.
Near vision.
Ma'am, okay. I'm sorry.
Difficulty in near vision, difficulty to read, right?
Yes.
Again, when he's trying to read, his pupils will constrict. Again,
and
paraxial rays are cut off as a result of which. Okay.
Yes.
Any other type of cataract that causes? You said dim light, right? So because you're saying dim light, I want to know if you know of any other cataract that can affect vision in dim light.
Nuclear cataract, yes, ma'am. Nuclear cataract.
What are the components of visual vision that can be affected by a cataract?
Visual acuity is affected and visual field is affected and.
So most commonly, it can affect visual acuity. This is your sharpness of vision. Okay, so when we are talking about visual acuity or Snellen's visual acuity, ETDRS, whatever we are doing, all these are high contrast visual acuity testing. Okay, so basically, as you have projected on your screen, this black on white, no, this is high contrast. Okay. Whereas if we reduce the illumination or change the color, make this whole font into gray, say, okay, the contrast will reduce. So another component of vision that your cataract can affect is contrast sensitivity. All right. Which type of cataract affects contrast sensitivity significantly much? It is your nuclear cataracts.
Okay.
All right. So in nuclear cataracts, the patient may still have good vision. So when I say good vision, 612, 618, okay. And you may wonder, should we really advise surgery for this patient or not? But the reason for advising surgery for such a patient who has nuclear cataract, who has 612, 618 vision, is that it will significantly improve contrast sensitivity. Or if I have to put it in a more simpler way, okay. So now at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, if you're sitting in a well-lit room, okay, or you're sitting outside, versus 6 a.m. in the morning and 6 a.m. in the evening, okay, the ambient light and what your vision will be like. So someone who has a nuclear type of cataract is likely to have that kind of vision, okay, as your vision will be during dawn or dusk. So is it worthwhile to operate on a patient who has a significant cataract, significant nuclear cataract? Definitely. Why?
Yes.
In addition to visual acuity, his contrast sensitivity also is going to improve significantly much.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So you said you want to ask for history of pain, redness, headache, watery eye. Why do you want to ask for each of these things?
Ma'am, because if at all we are suggesting the surgery, we have to rule out any kind of acute infections in the patient. So that's why we have to ask pain, redness, and headache and watery eye, which might be the result of acute infections of conjunctiva or cornea or uvea. And then history of trauma is because
No. Pain, we'll first finish pain, redness, headache, watery eye. Okay. So main thing with watery eye is you want to rule out whether the patient has dacryocystitis or not. If there is dacryocystitis, you want to manage the dacryocystitis first. Okay. So when we are saying watery eye, main thing is, first thing is, we are in our head, we are thinking of dacryocystitis. Okay. Now, you are suspecting cataract in this patient. Okay. And this patient says, yeah, he's having pain, he's having redness, he's having headache, he's having vomiting and things like that. Okay. So what will that lead you to think of? He's saying 1 year in the, I'm not, he's saying for the past 1 year, I'm not able to see. Okay. And I suddenly noticed that I have severe pain in my left eye. I have redness, I have watering. So what are you going to think in terms of?
It might be conjunctivitis. It might be dacryocystitis. It might be uveitis. Acute uveitis and iridocyclitis.
Okay. Very important. If you're suspecting a cataract, okay, and the patient has had the cataract for a long time, okay, and the patient presents to you with pain, redness, headache, watery eye, okay, you have to rule out one complication of cataract that could have occurred. That's a hint. Okay. So which complication am I talking about?
Maybe glaucoma.
Very good. What type of glaucoma?
Angle close.
I'm talking about lens-induced glaucoma.
Lens-induced glaucoma. Then pupillary, phacolytic or pupillary glaucoma.
Yeah. So basically one entity called lens-induced glaucoma. It can be a phacomorphic glaucoma, it can be a phacolytic glaucoma, or it can be a phacotopic glaucoma, whatever. Okay. So what are each of these things? What do you mean by phacomorphic? What do you mean by phacolytic? What do you mean by phacotopic?
Phacomorphic is if there is any change in the morphology of the lens. If the lens has become spherical, then it might come forward.
Spherical, so not spherical. Basically, if your lens becomes intumescent. So what exactly happens when the patient develops a cataract?
Ma'am, because in case of cataract, in cortical cataract, there is hydration, increased hydration, and that leads to water hydration of the lens, and because of which there is water droplets accumulating between the lamella of the cortex, and this at the once these water droplets they form, they coalesce, it then leads to lamellar cataract, and after lamellar cataract with increased water absorption, then we have imaging.
Basically, an intumescence, lens intumescence. The lens is going to fill up with fluid, the lens is going to swell up, and it is going to push the iris lens diaphragm forward. When it pushes your iris lens diaphragm forward, your angle is going to narrow, giving rise to a phacomorphic glaucoma.
Yes, ma'am.
What is a phacolytic glaucoma?
Because of
so normally your lens protein is a sequestered protein. That is, it is there within the confines of the capsule of the lens. Suppose it becomes liquefied, as in a case of hypermature cataract, some of this protein can leak out and it gives rise to an inflammatory reaction. Your macrophages are going to eat up this protein and go plug your
the trabecular meshwork.
Okay, so that can again cause secondary open angle glaucoma. So phacomorphic glaucoma was a secondary angle closure glaucoma. This phacolytic glaucoma is a secondary open angle glaucoma. All right. Okay, next. You said, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Now I can hear that. Yes.
What are colored halos? What conditions give rise to colored halos? Varsha, can you hear me? Are you there?
Might occur in corneal edema or in cataract, and also might occur in mucopurulent conjunctivitis.
Okay, how do you differentiate between the colored halos that occurs due to each of these conditions?
In case of mucopurulent conjunctivitis, we drain the mucopurulent excretion, then the colored halos will disappear.
Wash it away. Okay. Instead of saying drain, say you're going to wash away the conjunctival cul-de-sac. Okay.
Yes.
Colored halos will disappear. All right.
Yes.
Then
in case of cataract and glaucoma, to differentiate colored halos in cataract and glaucoma, we do a test called stenopic slit test or Quinchans test, and in that stenopic slit is placed in front of the patient's eye and asked if the colored halos are splitting or not, and if the colored halos are intact, then it is glaucoma. If the colored halos splits, then it is cataract.
Okay, so these colored halos basically appear because of dispersion of light. Okay,
yes.
In acute mucopurulent conjunctivitis, it's the mucopurulent discharge that is going to cause dispersion. So the moment you wash it away, it is going to go. Yes. In an incipient cataract, what happens? It's the fluid clefts, the vacuoles within the lens that are going to cause this dispersion and give rise to colored halos. So when you pass the stenopaque slit, only wherever the fluid clefts are there will be the appearance of these halos, and the moment you go towards normal lens tissue, those halos will break up. Whereas in case of acute congestive glaucoma, there's going to be corneal edema all over. So when you pass a stenopaque, the colored halos are going to persist and they are not going to break up.
Yes.
Okay. All right. In this uniocular diplopia, I think just say double vision. Okay, it's very. I know in your textbook it is mentioned that cataract can cause uniocular diplopia, but in clinical practice, very rarely we'll see anyone coming and saying, like I covered one eye and then I had double vision. So even if you don't mention double vision, we will not penalize you for it. Okay. Yes. Okay. Go on to the next slide. Okay. Ocular history, all right. Why is the past history relevant in a patient with cataract?
Ma'am, if we suggest the patient to undergo cataract surgery, it is relevant in case of management, preoperative management and postoperative management. That's why it is important. And
okay. We'll discuss a few things in detail. Okay. Now you said COPD, right? Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So what is the relevance of COPD to cataract?
Ma'am, I'm not exactly sure, but during the surgery, there might be bronchial constriction, sudden bronchial constriction.
Okay. So asthma is a part of COPD?
No.
Asthma is considered to be a part of COPD, no? That is my understanding. Bronchial asthma. Yeah. Yes. So now what do you use for the treatment of bronchial asthma?
Bronchodilators and anticholinergic drugs, beta agonists can be used.
Do you use steroids?
Yes, ma'am. Steroids are also given.
So can long-term use of steroids also give rise to cataract?
Yes,
they can also give rise to raised IOP. So it can come in the way. It can be the cause of your cataract, or it can interfere with your cataract surgery if your IOP is high.
Yes.
Another thing is, as you said, now we are going to make the patient lie down flat on his back.
Yes.
Right? And we are going to put a towel over his face.
Yes.
Right? A sterile eye towel. So it might be uncomfortable for the patient. So if we are suspecting, we'll probably give him like a preoperative shot of steroids. Make sure that we have oxygen available. Keep a pulse oximeter ready.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Why do you want to ask for history of diabetes, hypertension, ischemic heart disease, stroke?
Ma'am, in case of diabetes mellitus, there might be pre-senile cataract and also snowflake cataract in young aged people. and that might progression of cataract is faster in patient with diabetes mellitus. And in case of hypertension, they might be intraocular complications.
Okay. Most important thing is whenever we are talking about diabetes, diabetes has many effects on the eye. Okay. One of the things is, as you said, it can cause premature cataracts. It can cause what is that? Snowflake cataract, all of that. Okay. But more importantly, if your sugars are uncontrolled, what can happen? Wound healing can be affected post-operatively.
Yes.
That is the first thing. Second thing is a patient who has diabetes might also have associated diabetic retinopathy.
Yes.
Okay, so you want to screen the patient for retinopathy prior to taking him up for cataract surgery, because the cause of loss of vision may be the retinopathy and not the cataract per se. Or in some cases, they may be both. They may be cataract and retinopathy, but you have to remove the cataract if you have to treat the retinopathy.
Yes.
All right. Next thing is post cataract surgery. If sometimes what can happen is, if the sugars are not under control, or even if the sugars are under control, because of the release of inflammatory mediators, your diabetic retinopathy can worsen. The person can develop clinically significant macular edema, cystoid macular edema, progression of retinopathy, and things like that. So you want to ensure that the diabetes is well under control prior to cataract surgery.
Yes, ma'am.
Hypertension, if you are using peribulbar anesthesia, we are going to be using lignocaine, adrenaline. Again, if you give adrenaline, you know that the
adrenaline constriction of the vessel.
Yeah.
And
so all those things have to be kept in mind. If the patient is a known case of, say, a cerebrovascular accident, stroke, or ischemic heart disease, you want to elicit a history from the patient. You want to ask if the patient is taking any blood thinners or anything like that, because you don't want to give a block not knowing that the patient is on clopidogrel, ticagrelol or anything, and then patient will have retrovalvular hemorrhage and it will be a life-threatening complication.
Yes.
Okay. So these are simple things that you can avoid.
All
right. So for these reasons, you want to find out in detail the past history of the patient. Okay. Proceed to the next slide. Okay. Omit this. Next. Okay. 80-year-old male farmer, known case of. Okay. All right. Proceed.
Yes. General physical examination. Patient is 80-year-old male, moderately built and nourished, and he is conscious, cooperative, and well oriented to the time, place, and person. And temperature is afebrile to touch, and pulse is 80 beats per minute. Respiratory rate is 18 cycles per minute. Blood pressure is 130 by 84 millimeter Hg in right arm in sitting position, and he exhibits no evidence of pallor, icterus, clubbing, cyanosis, lymphadenopathy, or edema.
Okay.
Then examination of the eye. Ma'am, I've included systemic examination at the end after examination of the eye.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you this correction beforehand only. Your visual acuity should come in the beginning. After you comment about this head posture, facial symmetry, and all that. No, the next thing you talk about should be your visual acuity. After that, you tell the rest of the findings. Okay? Yeah. Continue.
Examination of the eye. Head posture is maintained, it's normal, and facial symmetry is also maintained. Ocular posture is maintained, and then visual acuity. Right eye and left eye. Uncorrected visual acuity. It is up to counting fingers up to 3 meters in both right and left eye, and perception of light is present in both the eyes. And pinhole examination revealed no improvement of the visual acuity, and near vision I couldn't check.
Okay, Varsha, I want to ask you, can I interrupt you after every slide? We'll finish the discussion of the slide and then move on. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so conventionally, when you're presenting in your exams, you will be expected to present, you tell that I'm going to present the findings of the right eye first, tell all the findings of the right eye, then you say I'm going to present the findings of the left eye next, present all the findings of the left eye.
Okay.
Okay, over here, one very important thing. So you said that the uncorrected visual acuity in both eyes is counting fingers at 3 meters.
Yes.
Some examiners don't like to accept this counting fingers. Okay,
yes.
So they expect you to say 3 by 60, 4 by 60. So how do you document visual acuity on a Snellen's chart? I'm presuming that all of you know, so I won't really go into the details. Okay, how do you document visual acuity on a Snellen's chart?
Ma'am, the patient on bedside manner, we have, or if it's not bedside, if the patient is asked to stand 6 meters away from the Snellen's chart and asked to read out the letters from above below, and the above is the greatest.
What are the letters on the Snellen's chart called as? They are called optotypes.
Excuse me, ma'am?
They are called optotypes.
Optotypes, yes, ma'am. The patient is asked to read out the optotypes from above below, and the greatest. If the patient is able to read all the optotypes, then it is documented as 6x6 vision.
Basically, if you can read the last line.
Last line, yes.
The bottommost line, the smallest optotypes. Okay, so it will either be 6x6 or 6x5, 6x5. Okay.
Yes.
Now, suppose he can't see the topmost optotype. That is,
Yes.
what is the topmost
6x60.
Okay. So what does a 6x60 mean?
Ma'am, 6x60 means that what normal person can see is in the denominator, and what the patient can see is in the numerator.
What a normal person can
Yes.
see from 60 meters,
Yes.
the patient is able to view from 6 meters.
Yes.
That's what it means. Okay.
Yes.
What a normal person can view from 36 meters,
Yes.
the patient is able to view from 6 meters.
Yes.
All right. So that's what
Yes.
your Snellen's chart. Now, suppose he can't see 6x60.
Yes. Then we ask the patient to move 1 meter towards the Snellen's chart and record it as.
Your counting fingers is equivalent to your
Yes.
making the patient advance towards the Snellen's chart. So when you're saying counting fingers 3 meters, some people don't accept this in the exam. This is what I have seen. Okay, they expect you to say 3x60.
3x60. That means the patient is standing 3 meters away from the Snellen's chart.
So what a normal person can see from 3 meters,
60 meters, the person
this patient is able to see from 3 meters.
Yes.
Okay. Now suppose he can't see anything from 1 meter. What do you do next?
Ma'am, we check for perception of light, or we check for near face counting fingers. Not
Counting fingers 1 meter, 1/60. If it's not there, then you will check counting fingers at half a meter. Then counting fingers close to face. Then hand movements.
Hand movements.
Okay. Then you'll check for PL.
Yes.
And PR. Now, what is very important is, this is a common mistake that we see in the exams. Okay. So once you have said that his vision is 3/60, okay, you cannot have taken an MBBS seat without passing your SSLC exam.
Yes.
Okay. So if you're saying that the uncorrected visual acuity is 3/60, you don't need to write PL is present.
Yes. So
point?
Present.
Yeah, it is automatically understood that everything else below that is present. Counting fingers close to face is also present. Counting fingers half meter is also present. Counting fingers 1 meter is also present. So you just write 3/60 and that's it.
Yes.
Hand movements close to face is not there, then you write PL present, then you check for PR, it makes sense.
Okay.
Is that clear? Okay.
Yes.
Now what is this pinhole visual acuity?
Ma'am, if pinhole, if it is a pinhole, this thing is placed in front of the eye, the pectoral rays are cut off, and the rays directly fall on the nodal point, and there is a slight improvement in the sight visual acuity.
What is the pinhole?
Ma'am, it is a.
Basically, it is an aperture. Okay.
Aperture, yes.
What will be the diameter of that aperture? 1 millimeter?
1 millimeter, yes.
1 millimeter aperture. So what are you doing? Basically, by putting this pinhole in front of the patient's eye, you're removing the effect of spherical aberration.
Okay, yes.
Okay. So when you remove the effect of spherical aberration, the clarity of vision or that acuity of vision will improve for the patient.
Yes.
Okay. Unless there is a central media opacity. It could be an opacity in the cornea, it could be an opacity in the lens, it could be an opacity in the vitreous cavity, or it could be a macular scar.
Yes.
Any pathology in the retina, basically. Anything. All right?
Yes.
In the field. Okay. All right. So near vision. Is it important to document near vision in a case of cataract? In what type of cataract will there be worsening of near vision? In what type of cataract will there be improvement of near vision?
Ma'am, in case of nuclear cataract, there is improvement of near vision. In case of senile posterior subcapsular cataract, there is worsening of this
Okay,
near
very good. So
vision.
what is this improvement of near vision in nuclear cataract called as?
It is called a second sight.
Very good. And what is the type? So what is the pathology that is happening over there?
Ma'am, in nuclear cataract,
Okay, I'll ask you more specifically. What is the type of myopia that you're encountering there? There's a myopic shift. Do you agree
yes,
with me?
myopic shift.
Okay. So what is the type of myopic shift that is occurring there? What do you call that type of myopia?
Presbyopia. It is seen index myopia. Yes.
Index myopia. Very good. Okay, you
Index
have
myopia.
axial, curvatural, index, positional.
Yes,
No?
yes. Index
What
myopia.
there is index myopia.
Yes.
Okay, move on to the next slide. Okay. Okay, what do you want to see in the eyelids in a patient who presents to you with cataract?
Eyelids.
Calm down, it's okay.
Yes. Infection, any kind of infection to the eyelids.
Okay, you want to look for blepharitis. Whether there is anterior blepharitis, you want to look for any meibomian gland dysfunction.
Yes.
Okay, posterior blepharitis. All right, so source of infection. Next, you want to look for any abnormalities of lipped globe malpositions.
Okay.
Or lipped globe apposition. Any abnormality of apposition. When I say abnormalities of apposition, mainly if there is any entropion or ectropion.
Yes.
Okay, if there is any dystichiasis, if there is any trichiasis, these things you want to look for in the eyelids and eyelashes. Any lag of thalamus, whether there is complete closure, there is incomplete closure. If there is incomplete closure, corneal exposure, then obviously you don't want to do cataract, and then there is that source of infection already. Okay. How do you examine the lacrimal apparatus?
Ma'am, lacrimal apparatus, we do regurgitation test to see if there is infection of the lacrimal sac, and if there is any purulent mucus or mucopurulent substance present in the lacrimal sac. So we have to palpate from the we have to put pressure on the medial canthus and see if there is any regurgitation of those suppurative.
Either the medial canthus or the area below just below the medial canthus. Okay. So what cord-like structure you're feeling over here is the medial canthus. The bony structure that you're feeling there is the anterior lacrimal crest. So just under anterior lacrimal crest over here will be your lacrimal sac. So you put pressure on the lacrimal sac and you want to see if there is any regurgitation of fluid or mucopurulent fluid or fluid laced with pus and things like that. Okay. Suppose your regurgitation test is negative and the patient is still saying, Ilan, I have watery. So what do you want to do for such a patient?
From that lacrimation, there might be increased lacrimation due to.
No, suppose you're suspecting an obstruction. Okay.
The
patient. Okay, I have dacryocystitis, but just before I came, I've pressed it, I have wiped everything clean, and I have come inside your examination room. Okay.
Yes.
Now you have to confirm and tell that, yeah, this might be dacryocystitis. No, this might not be dacryocystitis. What can you do? Can you do a lacrimal syringing? Can you hear me? Varsha?
Yes, ma'am. I can hear you.
Can you do a lacrimal syringing for the patient?
Yes, ma'am. We can do lacrimal syringing where from one upper canthi,
Okay. Details of lacrimal syringing probably when there's a case discussion on dacryocystitis, we can discuss. All right. Or if we have time in the end, I'll just let you know. Okay. Conjunctiva, what do you want to look for?
Conjunctiva, we have to see if there's any congestion, if there's any redness.
Congestion and discharge. Whether if there is congestion, is it an infective cause or is it any other cause? If it's an infective cause, I don't want to operate. If it's an inflammatory cause, what could be the cause of inflammation? Whether it is a circumcorneal ciliary congestion or whether it's a superficial congestion. Yes. Okay. Well, how do you differentiate between the two?
I'm not sure.
This is an important question. Read out. Okay.
Yes.
How do you differentiate between circumcorneal ciliary congestion and conjunctival congestion. So basically, your superficial conjunctival congestion will appear bright red, whereas your circumcorneal ciliary congestion will appear purplish red. Okay. Your superficial conjunctival congestion will have a branching filigree kind of pattern, whereas your circumcorneal ciliary congestion will have a radial orientation. From the limbus, you will see radial lines.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Your superficial conjunctival congestion is mobile. That is, if you move the conjunctiva like that, you'll see the congestion is moving. That one will not move.
Yes.
A drop of phenylephrine, you can blanch superficial conjunctival congestion.
Yes.
Where you cannot blanch deep congestion.
Yes.
And some causes. So where will you see superficial conjunctival congestion? If there is conjunctivitis, if there's any foreign body, things like that. Where will you see circumcorneal congestion? Is as a corneal abrasion, corneal ulcer, uveitis, acute angle closure glaucoma, postoperative inflammation, endophthalmitis. In all those cases, you will see congestion.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Move on to the next slide. Okay.
First, I'll present the right eye. Cornea examined under the torchlight, and it is normal in shape, size, and sensation and transparency. And arcus senilis is same. And the anterior chamber contents are clear and depth is normal. And iris, the color and pattern are normal. And pupil is round, regular, and it is reactive to light. Direct light reflex, indirect light reflex, and near reflex all are normal. And lens is grayish white in color, and iris shadow can be seen. And now, yes.
Same, there is no other change, right, in the left eye?
Yes.
Okay, now tell me, what are the normal corneal dimensions? You said normal, no?
Yes, ma'am. Normal corneal dimensions, it is slightly elliptical. Horizontal, this thing is more than this thing, vertical. So it is
the horizontal ellipse. Okay.
Yes, horizontal is 12 millimeters and vertical is 11 millimeters.
11.7, 11. Okay, 11.5, 11. All right, I'll accept that. Then you told me about the anterior surface. What about the posterior corneal surface? What is the diameter of the posterior corneal surface?
It is a little bit bigger.
It is circular. If this is 11.5 and 11, that is 11.5 all around.
Yes, 11.5 all. Yes.
Okay. Yes. So when I ask you for dimensions, the next thing you will tell me is radius of curvature. What is the radius of curvature of the anterior corneal surface? What is the radius of curvature of the posterior corneal surface? What is the central thickness of the cornea? What is the peripheral thickness of the cornea? Okay, read out.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
All right. Anterior radius of curvature, posterior radius of curvature, central thickness, peripheral thickness.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So we spoke about size, shape, surface. Surface is one more very important thing. Whether the corneal surface is regular or irregular.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. You have to say it's a regular surface.
Yes.
Sheen. What do you mean by sheen?
Sheen is when cornea, when we throw light on the cornea, there is.
See, basically any highly polished surface, say take your mobile phone surface, okay, or the back surface of your mobile phone, all right? So the front surface of your mobile phone, this glass is highly polished. So when I put my torch on this, you can see a clear reflection of the torchlight on this highly polished surface. That is your sheen. Whereas when I put it on a more rougher surface, like on wood or on the back side of my phone and things like that, the image is not going to be very clear. Okay. Yes. So that will tell you whether sheen is normal or not. And what is responsible for the sheen? It is your tear film. Having a very good tear film is paramount to having good corneal sheen, and it also directly contributes to your visual acuity.
Yes.
If that tear film is not okay, corneal sheen will not be okay, neither will your visual acuity be good. Okay. Yes. Then you have your sensation and transparency.
Yes.
Okay. How do you test corneal sensations?
Ma'am, cotton.
Use a cotton wisp and test for sensation. Yes. All right. Now, what is the importance of checking for anterior chamber depth in a patient with cataract? What will a shallow anterior chamber in a patient with cataract tell you? What will a deep anterior chamber in a patient with cataract tell you?
Ma'am, shallow anterior chamber will tell that it is intumescent cataract where the
We'll give you
lens is
information
swollen.
intumescent cataract. Very good.
Yes.
What about a deep anterior chamber?
Deep anterior chamber, the cataract is progressed and there is
Can there be a zonular dehiscence? Now, suppose there is a zonular dehiscence, there is phacodonesis, tremulousness of the lens. Okay, the zonules are weak and your lens has moved back. Okay,
Yes.
then also your anterior chamber can become deep.
Yes.
All right. So, what other conditions will give rise to a deep anterior chamber? Where else will you see a deep anterior chamber?
Ma'am, in case of aphakia, pseudophakia.
Aphakia, very good. Pseudophakia, why do you get a deep anterior chamber?
Ma'am, because
Okay, what is the thickness of your crystalline lens?
it's around crystalline lens normal is 10 anterior posterior.
Diameter of the lens will be around 10 millimeters. What is the thickness? It will be around 3 or 4 millimeters.
3 or 4 millimeters.
If it's nuclear cataract, it can be thicker or it can be slightly thinner. All right.
Yes.
More importantly, okay, you are removing a 4 millimeter lens and replacing it with what is the thickness of the intraocular lens? Have you seen a cataract surgery being performed?
Yes, ma'am, I've seen.
What is the thickness of the posterior chamber intraocular lens thickness? It's around 0.9 to 1 millimeter.
0.9 to 1 millimeter. Okay. Yes,
okay, so you're removing 4 millimeters and you're putting 1 millimeter. So what do you expect of the iris diaphragm? You expect it to fall back.
Yes.
The chamber to become deep.
Deeper. Yes.
Right? Okay. Yes. Why do you want to see for iris color and pattern in a patient with cataract?
Normally, there might be atrophy of the iris and
uveitic cataract. Uveitic cataract. Okay. Yes. All right. Pupil examination is a very important aspect of preoperative cataract evaluation. Okay. Yes. Why?
Ma'am, because we have to dilate the pupil during surgery, so it's important to see if the pupil is reactive or not reactive.
Okay. More importantly, your pupil response, your pupillary light reflex is going to tell you about the intactness of your anterior visual pathway. Okay. Yes. So suppose a patient has a mature cataract or a hypermature cataract. You see that the pupil is reacting briskly to light. You can tell the patient in all likelihood post-operatively the vision recovery will be good unless there's a scar or something like that. Okay, which you obviously cannot see. Okay. So but suppose the pupil reaction is sluggish, it is dilating to light. There's a relative afferent pupillary defect. Okay, yes. You know that even if you do surgery, this patient may not develop good post-operatively.
Okay, yes.
So you can forewarn the patient.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Right. So examining your pupil is a very important aspect of your preoperative cataract evaluation. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Tell me about the lens. Grayish white is an iris shadow. What is this iris shadow?
Ma'am, when the light is shown from the temporal side, at an angle, the shadow of the iris over the lens can be seen because lens opacity on the lens acts as a screen on which the shadow of the iris can be seen, and this is seen in.
You said opacity of the lens will act as a screen. Okay, yes. But what is very important for the appearance of an iris shadow?
The lens is not yet swollen. The lens is
no. Basically, you should have clear fibers between the posterior surface of the iris and the opacified lens. You should have clear lens fibers. Only if you have clear lens fibers, as in a case of immature cataract, you will get iris shadow. Okay, now grayish white, this is suggestive of an immature senile cataract. Okay, yes. Now suppose it is pearly white. Okay, yes. It will have that sheen, it will have that shininess.
Yes.
If you look at a pearl, how it will have that shininess, no? So that will be a
mature cataract.
Mature cataract, senile mature cataract. Okay.
Senile mature cataract.
Okay, suppose it is a milky white opacity.
Milky white, hypomature cataract.
Very good. It will be hypomature senile cataract. It can be a sclerotic cataract or it can be a Morgagnian cataract. Okay, very good.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't open this chat window at all. Okay, next. Next slide, please.
That's it. Systemic examination. Cardiovascular system, S1 and S2 are good, and there were no normals. And respiratory system, decreased breath sounds on both the sides. And CNS, no focal neurological.
Okay, we'll proceed.
Professional diagnosis, senile immature cataract in both the eyes.
Okay, all right. Okay,
Yes,
all right. So ideally, whenever you're talking about any ophthalmological diagnosis, you say right eye senile immature cataract, left eye senile immature cataract. Okay, what do you want to do next?
Ma'am, we have to do. We have to give options of cataract surgery to the patient.
See, whenever a patient comes to you, see, so basically, whenever a patient comes to you, you want to complete your clinical examination, then you want to order for a set of investigations, and once all these things are okay, then you want to take the patient up for surgery. Okay.
Yes.
So, what other things are remaining in your examination?
Investigations are yet to be done. Then also we can do a slit lamp examination and ophthalmoscopic examination.
So after doing a torchlight examination, I want to do a slit lamp examination. Okay, Rahul, I'll get back to your question. Okay. Neil, very good investigations. Okay. So first thing is you want to do a, after you do your torchlight examination, you want to do a slit lamp examination. Slit lamp examination, any findings that you've not seen on the torchlight, such as anterior segment flare, cells, endothelial keratic precipitates, presence of pseudo exfoliation, and most importantly, grading of the cataract. Okay, you use something known as lens opacification classification system, LOCS. Okay, so you basically have one card with colors. Okay, it's color coded. So you'll match the cataract with that LOCS card and say that this is the grade of the cataract. Okay. Okay. What do you do next? After slit lamp examination, ma'am. After slit lamp? Fundoscopy. You have to do a fundoscopy. You want to examine the posterior segment. Okay. You want to do indirect ophthalmoscopy. You want to use a 98D or a 90D or a 78D to examine the macula. Okay. Slit lamp biomicroscopy. Okay. One important thing that was missed in your examination was digital tonometry. Okay. You want to do a digital tonometry to see roughly what ideally do an applanation tonometry to establish the preoperative intraocular pressure. Yes. What will happen if the intraocular pressure is high and you operate on such a patient? Ma'am, there might be complications which lead to complications. I know. I'm asking which dreaded complication can happen. Explosive choroidal hemorrhage. Explosive choroidal hemorrhage. Yes. Okay. So you want to make sure that the patient's pressures are under control before you take the patient up for cataract surgery. What do you want? What examination do you want to do next? You want to do a lacrimal syringing. All patients who are undergoing any intraocular procedure, it could be cataract, it could be trabeculectomy, it could be a retinal surgery. Okay. Yes. You want to do a lacrimal syringing and make sure that there is no element of dacryocystitis. Yes. I told you, right? Like suppose I am a patient, I've like emptied my sac and come, you don't see any watering. You postpone surgery, but that source of infection is there. Yes. Okay, so you want to do lacrimal syringing. Yes. After doing this, you want to do some investigations. Yes. What blood investigations do you want to do? And what ocular investigations do you want to do for this patient? Ma'am, blood investigations, we have to look for complete blood count, and we have to see for HBs, AG and HIV serum. We have to rule out HIV and HBs, AG, and we might also have to do blood sugar to rule out diabetes. So for the first shot, I will do blood sugar levels. Yes. Basic investigations, I will do a blood sugar level. I will do serology for the patient. In your books and all, they say complete blood count and all. Complete blood count and all not indicated. If you want, you can get one hemoglobin level done. Serology, blood sugar levels, hemoglobin, blood pressure has to be documented. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so you will do all of this. What ocular investigations do you want to do? Ma'am, retinoscopy. We have to look for retina. Anything else? Very good. Biometry. Okay. Biometry. Yes, ma'am. Biometry is anterior curvature of the cornea and axial length of the eyeball is checked. Okay, this is a case of senile immature cataract. Biometry, so you're going to check the keratometry, right? That is your corneal power. You're going to measure the axial length of the eye. You're going to put both of these in a formula. Okay. So what is the name of the formula?
SRK formula, scan and keratometry.
Okay. What does this SRK stand for? SRK is one of the formulae that is available. Sanders, Retzlaff, Krapf.
Yes,
Okay. So that is one of the formulas that is Sanders, Retzlaff, and Krapf. KRAFF. Holiday is another formula. Very good. You have Bincost. You have a whole bunch. Hoffman. Yeah, you have a whole bunch of things available. Okay.
Yes.
What we are talking about until now is ultrasound biometry. There's a different type of biometer known as optical biometers. Okay.
Yes.
So instead of using sound, those optical biometers will use light to measure. So they are believed to be more precise. Okay.
Yes.
So if they ask you in an exam, IOL master, Lenstar, those are optical biometers that can also be used to measure the intraocular lens power implant or the lens implant power rather.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Now suppose a patient has a mature cataract or a hypermature cataract. What other ocular investigation do you want to do? Very good. B scan. Neil has said B scan. So what is this B scan?
Ultrasound B scan.
Yeah, what does the B in the B scan stand for? Neil, you can unmute if you want. You can unmute. Okay, what does the B in the B scan stand for? Brightness. What does the A in the A scan stand for? Amplitude. So when you're doing an A scan, you're basically, you're going to get a series of spikes. You're going to measure the distance between the spikes and you're going to arrive at certain numbers.
Yes.
B scan, it's going to show you some echoes. So it will show you a rough image of the eye itself. Okay.
Yes.
So basically what you're looking at is the brightness of those echoes. So what information can you get on the B scan? You can see if the vitreous is clear or if there's any vitreous hemorrhage, if the retina is on or if there's any detachment, if the patient is a glaucoma suspect, if the cupping is very severe, if the patient has glaucomatous optic atrophy, or if the patient has near total cupping, you'll be able to appreciate optic nerve head cupping.
Yes.
Okay, so all this information you'll get on a B scan. Okay, don't, in your exams, everybody will say retinal function test. We don't do any retinal function test. We are going to look at the vision. We are going to look at the pupils mainly.
Yes.
And if necessary,
Yes.
we're going to do a B scan. Okay, if your vision is hand movements or PL or whatever, look at the pupillary reaction, whether it is brisk, not brisk. If it is brisk, okay, it's a good sign. Okay, even if it is brisk, get a B scan.
Yes.
Okay, for documentation purposes. All right, not
Yes.
brisk, all the more reason to get a B scan to see if there's any retinal detachment, any other vitreous hemorrhage, if there's any glaucomatous changes at the disc and things like that. All of these things can be picked up on the B scan. All right.
Yes.
Okay. Next, what do you want to do for the patient?
Investigations. After investigations, medical management is not a surgical management.
Okay. In the existing scenario, one very important investigation we left out, no? COVID RT-PCR.
RT-PCR. Yes.
RT-PCR. All right. Okay. Yes. Then what do you want to do next? Refraction for the patient. You want to see if with refraction, if it's a small cuneiform cataract or a small cupuliform cataract, whether this patient is going to improve with refraction.
Yes.
All likelihood, if the patient has come to you with 3/60 vision and all that, he's not going to improve.
Yes.
So the definitive treatment for this patient is going to be
surgical treatment.
Very good. Okay. Yes. Now what surgery do you want to, what do you want to do for this patient?
We have different types of surgeries. ICC, intracapsular cataract extraction, extracapsular
for
cataract.
This particular patient, 80-year-old male who's come to you with senile immature cataract, what do you want to do?
And phacoemulsification can be done.
Okay. Okay. Can you be a little more specific? So whenever you're talking about a surgical procedure, not just in ophthalmology, anywhere, all right?
Okay. Yes.
Give out the complete surgical procedure, all right?
Okay.
So for this patient, yeah.
Phacoemulsification, we have to do before the starting of the surgery, we have to give dilate the pupil using the dilators. And
No. Now, if I ask you what surgical procedure, what do you want to do for this patient? You will say, I want to do phacoemulsification with foldable posterior chamber intraocular lens under what anesthesia? Under topical anesthesia or under local anesthesia, under peribulbar anesthesia. Which eye, what procedure? Procedure, you are not going to do phaco and leave the patient aphakic. You're going to do a phaco and put an intraocular lens. Or I'm going to do a left eye small incision cataract surgery with
intraocular lens.
Rigid or foldable posterior chamber intraocular lens under local or peribulbar anesthesia. Which eye are you going to operate first? Neil has already said he's going to operate on the worst eye first. So the eye which has poorer vision, you're going to operate on first. Okay. The vision is the same. In your patient, it was 3/60, 3/60. So how will you decide which eye to operate on?
Any eye.
Either eye. I'll ask the patient, I give the option to the patient. I tell him that the vision is same in both eyes. Whichever eye he wants, we can go ahead and operate. All right. Okay. What preoperative measures do you want to take before doing surgery for this patient?
We have to make sure again the antibiotics are given and antiseptic is applied and the pupil is dilated completely.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
After that is preoperative.
Okay. All right. So preoperative topical antibiotics. Okay, there's no real role for systemic antibiotics preoperatively, or in fact even postoperatively. Although prophylactically we do still give postoperative systemic antibiotics. Okay, so preoperatively we can give the patient antibiotics, topical antibiotics, along with topical flurbiprofen. So what is the role of this flurbiprofen? Flurbiprofen basically helps to maintain intraoperative mydriasis.
Yes.
Okay. So most of the times we put the patient on antibiotic as well as flurbiprofen preoperatively.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
And on the day of the surgery, just before the patient is taken up for surgery, you put a drop of, once the patient's pupil is well dilated, you mark which eye. Okay, yes. Right eye or left eye, you check on your case sheet, mark which eye.
Yes.
Put a drop of Paracane and put 1 drop of 5% povidone iodine.
Povidone iodine, yes.
Okay, then you can paint the eye, give what? What anesthesia do you use in cataract surgery?
Local anesthesia.
What are the anesthetic options available?
A lignocaine with 2 lakh.
That is the drug that you're using.
Excuse me.
That's the drug that you're using.
Bupivacaine plus lignocaine plus.
What are the routes of anesthesia?
Peribulbar and retrobulbar and.
See, you can use general anesthesia in pediatric age group, and if the patient is uncooperative, yes. Or you can use local anesthesia. Yes. Local anesthesia, you have peribulbar or retrobulbar anesthesia or posterior subtenons anesthesia. Yes. Or you can use topical anesthesia, in which case we put drops, or you have the option of intracameral anesthesia, wherein we put intracameral lignocaine. Intracameral lignocaine. Lignocaine is available for intracameral use, not the injectable lignocaine. Okay? You get preservative-free lignocaine along with phenylephrine for intracameral use only, for intramydriasis as well as analgesia.
Analgesia.
So what are the different types of anesthesia? General,
local and retrobulbar, peribulbar.
Topical, intracameral. The types of anesthesia that are available for use. In addition to that, you have your facial nerve block.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Now, what drug are you going to use? Somebody said lignocaine, bupivacaine. Okay. Lignocaine, what percentage are you going to use?
4% lignocaine.
Intracameral technically isn't a part of local anesthesia. Someone, Neil has asked. Okay, intracameral is a separate form of anesthesia. When we're talking about local anesthesia, we are basically talking about local infiltrative anesthesia. Okay, so when I say local infiltrative anesthesia, I mean either retrobulbar or peribulbar anesthesia. Okay. Okay. So what percentage of lignocaine are you using?
4% lignocaine.
4% if you're using topical, topical lignocaine. 2% if you're using it for
Intracameral.
2%
Retrobulbar and peribulbar.
infiltrative anesthesia. So peribulbar and for your retrobulbar anesthesia, you're using 2% lignocaine. So in addition to this 2% lignocaine, what are you adding to this lignocaine?
Atropine, 1:2 lakh concentration.
Atropine or something else? Adrenaline.
Adrenaline, I'm sorry, adrenaline.
Adrenaline and one more thing, hyaluronidase. Very good. Okay. So why do you use adrenaline along with local anesthesia?
To prevent excessive bleeding, because the adrenaline causes vasoconstriction, and it also increases the anesthetic effect of the lignocaine.
Okay.
Because the concentration of lignocaine increases there itself.
So mainly for 4 things. One thing, it'll cause vasoconstriction, so reduces the bleeding. Okay. Then the next thing is, so the amount of there's a systemic absorption. Okay, so more amount of the drug is available locally.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So in addition to that, you add hyaluronidase because it will break down your and bloodless field, as Neil has said, but bloodless field will matter more when we're doing some extraocular procedure rather than cataract surgery. Okay, basically we're giving a block inside the orbit, so bloodless field, not bloodless field will not really matter. But of course, when you're doing a dialysis or rhinostomy, it will matter. All right, the use of adrenaline. Okay, all right, then.
Hyaluronidase is also.
What is the hyaluronidase? Basically, it will increase the local availability. It will break down your hyaluronic acid, ensure that your drug will permeate better, it will diffuse better. So it is going to act better.
Yes.
All right. Okay, what is this peribulbar anesthesia? What is retrobulbar anesthesia?
Different routes of anesthesia where
what I mean to ask you is, if I say I'm giving a peribulbar block, where am I depositing the drug? If I say I'm giving a retrobulbar block, where am I depositing the drug? Okay, Neil is giving me an answer.
Is in a conal space, that is zonular ring, outside the zonular ring. That is
not zonular ring, sorry, muscular cone. Okay,
muscular cone.
Deposited inside the muscular cone or the intraconal space, that is retrobulbar anesthesia. Whereas into the extraconal space, that is peribulbar anesthesia. The other thing is, of course, subtenons anesthesia. All right, subtenons, you deposit the anesthetic agent in your subtenons space. All right, your subtenons space essentially continues posteriorly into your intraconal space. So basically, eventually, your anesthetic drug is going to diffuse there. Only thing is, you reduce the risk of globe perforation, you reduce the risk of direct damage to the blood vessel when you're giving a subtenons anesthesia. So people would prefer to give a subtenons anesthesia compared to a retrobulbar anesthesia. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. All right. What next?
After we start with the process of the phacoemulsification surgery.
Tell me, what is the difference? You said ICC, ECC, you started off. No, what is the difference between ECCE and ICCE? Can you hear me? Neil, you can unmute your. I'm like asking to.
Ma'am, am I audible? Hello.
Yeah, you're audible.
I couldn't hear you, ma'am.
Okay. What is the difference between ECCE and ICCE?
Ma'am, in case of ECCE, removed along with the capsule, whole of the capsule is removed. In case of ICC, in case of ECC, the capsule is left right there, and only the lens is removed without the capsule.
Basically, in extracapsular, you're trying to preserve the posterior capsule, okay, as well as a portion of the equatorial capsule and the anterior capsular rim. so that
Yes.
it creates a posterior chamber intraocular lens. Whereas in an intracapsular cataract extraction, you're removing the lens along with the capsule.
Capsule.
What is the indication for intracapsular cataract extraction present day surgery?
And if there is any zonular, the dehiscence or
If there is either, if it's a badly subluxated lens, only then. Even in cases of subluxation, we'll try as much as possible to do an extracapsular extraction. We'll try to refix the bag by using either a capsular tension ring or a Sionis ring or something, and try to still preserve the capsule. But if we can't, then we obviously have to go in for an intracapsular cataract extraction.
Yes,
Okay, all right. What is phacoemulsification? What's the difference between phacoemulsification and small incision cataract surgery?
In case of phacoemulsification, we use piezoelectric current, and which makes the nucleus cut into fragments. But in case
okay, so in phacoemulsification, you're using a smaller incision. Okay, so a smaller incision, you say 2.8 mm, or if it's micro incision, 2.2 mm. Okay, you're passing a phaco probe. Okay, which is going to deliver ultrasonic energy, which is going to emulsify the nucleus, aspirate the nucleus. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Manual small incision, manually you're going to remove. Before you do all this removal, what do? You said you're going to open,
Yes, ma'am.
you're going to preserve the capsule and all. No? So tell me the steps of phacoemulsification surgery.
My first step is making of side ports, and after this we do
okay, wound construction. Okay, next
wound construction. Then we inject it to dye the anterior capsule. The dye is trypan blue, which differentiates anterior capsule from the other structures. And after we that we do a main port where we give an incision of 2.8 to 3.2 millimeters at a 3 o'clock site, and from there we do CCC, which is called as continuous circular capsulotomy.
Continuous curvilinear capsular excess. Okay, I'm going to interrupt you here. What are the different ways in which you can open the anterior capsule? One way is continuous curvilinear capsular excess. One more is can opener. When you just open the capsule, okay, so it's like irregular capsular cuts. One more is envelope. When we take a scissor, when we take a capsule cutting scissor and cut open the capsule with the scissor, that is an envelope technique. Which is the best of the three? Continuous curvilinear capsular excess. Why is it the best? Because margin is going to be regular, so there is going to be less chance of extension to the posterior capsule, risk of injury to the posterior capsule. Next thing is when you place the intraocular lens inside the bag, the way it will fibrose is more predictable. Okay, so your post-operative refractive outcomes will be better. Less chance of or less risk of lens-induced astigmatism and things like that. Okay. Less chances of dislocation of the lens, less chances of subluxation of the lens, and all of that. Okay. Okay. Then, after doing continuous curvilinear capsular excess, what do you do next?
We do hydrodissection, wherein which we separate the cortical cataract from the posterior capsule.
So what's the difference between hydrodissection and hydrodelineation? In hydrodissection, you're separating the cortex from the
posterior capsule.
Whereas in
case of hydrodelineation, epinucleus is separated from the endonucleus.
From the nucleus. All right.
Nucleus.
Okay. What do you do next?
After that, we are left with capsular bag. We have to
capsular bag. No. Then you will rotate the nucleus to ensure that your hydro procedure is complete. Between each of these steps, you're going to be using some substance known as viscoelastic. So why do we use viscoelastics?
Because make sure the procedure is going right. Nucleus fragmentation is occurring properly.
Basically to maintain space. Okay, viscoelastic we're going to use to inflate the anterior chamber, so we have space to work with our instruments. That is one thing. It will coat the endothelium. It will push your posterior capsule back. Okay, so it will ensure that there is less endothelial cell loss and less risk of injury to the posterior capsule. We can put some viscoelastic on top of the cornea, so it will also give an additional magnification. Okay, then
After that, we use piezoelectric probe, phacoemulsification probe, and
Phaco probe. Don't complicate
probe.
piezoelectric crystal and all
Yes,
that.
ma'am.
We are just going to
Phaco probe.
phaco probe inside, emulsify and aspirate the nucleus. Okay.
Yes, emulsification, aspiration.
After we aspirate the nucleus, we are going to do a cortical cleanup. Okay,
Yes,
or a cortical wash. After we do the cortical wash, we are going to place a foldable posterior chamber intraocular lens inside the capsular bag.
Yes.
Remove out the visco, hydrate the side ports, give either put intracameral antibiotic or give a subconjunctival antibiotic along with a steroid. Okay, Gentadexa. How is a small incision cataract surgery different from phaco?
Ma'am, in small incision, the incision is made in the sclera and scleral tunnel. Through scleral tunnel, anterior chamber is.
1 minute, I'll interrupt you. I've got a question. Why is posterior chamber intraocular lens preferred here? Posterior chamber intraocular lens is preferred to be put in all cases. Okay, because that is the most physiological. You're removing the crystalline lens, and in its place, I'm going to replace. I'm replacing the crystalline lens with something else. So posterior chamber intraocular lens is the most physiological. All right. Foldable lens, because through that small incision, I can place a foldable lens. So I would prefer to put a foldable lens. Rigid lens, when I have done a manual small incision cataract surgery, I can use either a rigid lens or a foldable. Okay. Anterior chamber, if I don't have the PC, then I'll put an anterior chamber lens. But nowadays, that also, we are trying to reduce the usage of anterior chamber lens. We use either an iris claw lens, retrofixated iris claw lens. That is, we'll put the lens behind the iris and tuck the iris into the lens. The lens will have 2 claws like that. We'll tuck the iris inside that. Okay. Or we do something known as a scleral fixated lens. That is, we will anchor you get special scleral fixated intraocular lenses. We'll anchor the 2 haptics to the wall of the sclera. All right. So what we're aiming to do is we're aiming to put the lens back in the posterior chamber and try and make it as physiological as possible. Okay. So a PCIOL is preferred. Okay. Then continue. How is a manual small incision cataract surgery different from phaco?
Ma'am, in case of phaco, the incision put is in the cornea and it is smaller. But in case of SICS, the incision is put in the sclera and it is bigger, which is almost 5 to 7 millimeters.
In SICS, small incision cataract surgery, we are making a sclerocorneal tunnel. Part of the wound is in the sclera, part in the limbus, and part in the cornea. Okay, it is a valvular incision. Even in phaco, it's a valvular. Valvular, andre, it is like a step. It is not a single planar incision. So when you form the anterior chamber or when the intraocular pressure builds up, one lip of the wound will go sit under the other lip of the wound like that. If your wound construction is good and the wound will not leak. So it doesn't necessitate any suturing at the end of the procedure. Then the next thing that is different is nucleus management. Your capsulorhexis, hydro and all are small incision. In small incision, we are going to prolapse the nucleus out from the bag into the anterior chamber. Then we'll put a vectis underneath. We'll put a Sinskey hook on top, sandwich the nucleus, and deliver the nucleus through the main wound. So your wound obviously has to be larger. So your wound is going to be 6 millimeters, whereas in phaco it's going to be 2.8 millimeters. So larger wound heals more slowly. Smaller wound heals faster. Larger wound can cause more surgical induced astigmatism. Smaller wound can cause less surgical induced astigmatism. Main difference between SICS and phaco. Nucleus management. The cortical cleanup is the same. Placement of lens. In small incision, you can use a rigid lens in addition to a
foldable lens.
You can use a foldable lens or a rigid lens. Commonly use rigid lens. Okay. All right. Okay. I have one question here. Won't an iris fixated IOL cause secondary angle closure by iris bombay? So why does this iris bombay occur? So if there is 360-degree synechiae between your retrofixated lens and your if there is a 360-degrey synechiae basically between your lens and your iris, okay, there is no place for circulation of so that is going to push your iris diaphragm or balloon your iris diaphragm forward. Okay, in a retrofixated lens also there will be a slight vault That is, there'll be a slight difference in the angulation between the haptic and the optic. So there will be some amount of space for circulation of the aqueous humor. So it is not going to cause secondary iris angle closure by iris bombing.
Yes.
Right? Okay. What post-operative instructions are you going to give the patient?
Post-operatively, we have to give antibiotics and
Systemic antibiotics, anti-inflammatory, or
anti-inflammatory.
and then you're going to give topical antibiotic steroid. If
Yes.
indicated, anti-glaucoma medication. If you're suspecting phase dioply. If necessary, cycloplegic drugs. But mainly topical antibiotic steroids, along with that an anti-inflammatory and NSAID, such as neparfanan. Why do you give NSAID? Basically, NSAIDs are known to reduce the incidence of post-operative cystoid macular edema. Okay, so you can give non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Initial post-operative phase, you're going to give a high dose of antibiotic steroid. Over a period of time, you're going to taper off this dose. Why do you give high dose of antibiotic steroid? Why do you give steroids? Any other surgical procedures, you don't give steroids, no? When you do general surgery or obstetrics or any other wound, you usually don't give steroids saying wound healing will be affected. But in the eye, if we are not going to give steroids, okay, the inflammation is going to cause more collateral damage. Uveitis can cause more damage. So we would prefer to give some steroids.
Yes.
Okay, so we give antibiotic steroids. Initially, we give it in a higher dosage, say 6 or 8 times a day, and then, gradually taper off the dose.
Yes.
Is that clear? So systemic antibiotics, anti-inflammatory, antibiotic steroids, and
Topical.
NSAID. If indicated, anti-glaucoma medication, cycloplegics. Okay. What are the complications, post-operative complications of cataract surgery?
And post-operatively, there might be shallow anterior chamber or endophthalmitis, or we can have in late post-operatively, we might have posterior capsular this cataract formation. And
okay, so there are some early post-operative complications. There are some late post-operative complications. As I said, one of the common early post-operative complications is a wound leak, shallow anterior chamber, iris prolapse, hyphema, striate keratopathy. All of these things are early post-operative complications. Dreaded complications, early post-op endophthalmitis or endophthalmitis at any point of time. There's one more entity known as toxic anterior segment syndrome. Okay, TAS. TAS mainly occurs because of some chemical reaction. The clinical picture is similar to endophthalmitis. It is not endophthalmitis. It is because of some chemicals. Say, if the sterilization process, we use some chemicals to sterilize the inside of the cannulas and things like that we're using, we can expect to see TAS. Okay, so we should be able to differentiate between TAS and endo. Okay, late post-operative complications. Yeah, as you said, there can be regmatogenous RD, there can be what is that? I'm sorry. You said posterior capsular opacification. Okay, so what is this posterior capsular opacification?
Ma'am, after surgery, the capsule which is present that might become opacified because of dysplasia of E cells. Hello, ma'am. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Ma'am, we cannot hear you.
Might be her power.
Yeah, her video is also frozen. Might be some network issue.
Ashmita, what happened?
Ma'am got disconnected, I suppose. She'll rejoin. In between, she must have got some network issue because her video stopped and then she got disconnected.
Till where we reach now?
Sir, we are almost towards the end. Ma'am was just discussing some post-operative observations.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Madam is in the middle also we had network issues. Huh? There was disturbance. Varsha, I was watching you in the YouTube. You did really well. You presented and answered almost everything. Did really well. Okay.
So, ma'am will be joining us back or like?
I think she has got a call from the hospital. That's why she's on a.
So you're on mute.
Madam is joining. Madam.
Ma'am will be joining us back, no?
Yeah, she joined, almost joining.
Okay.
So management all done, no?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yes, sir. We were discussing complications, sir.
Complications. Okay.
Yes.
Fine. So next, which case you're planning to present, Varsha?
So ENT case, sir. I have ENT cases now. Yes, sir. If it's possible.
Present one ENT case. Okay. Next.
Okay, sir.
Preferably DNS or tonsillitis. Preferably. Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
And soon we'll have, after this fourth year subjects, we'll come to third year subjects also. Competitions we are having. Case presentation competitions. Okay.
Yes,
just to check, just to boost your confidence levels. How nicely you present the cases.
Yes,
that all will be okay. We'll just check that.
Yes.
So prepare one good case for that also.
Yes, sir. Actually, I have not had my ophthalmology postings yet, sir. But I wanted to present a case. We have ophthalmology post next month. Yes.
That's good. See, without attending only you presented so well. Now with this insight and inputs, now if you attend the class, no, it will be.
I am very happy to be a part of this presentation, sir. And I am
joined. So
I'm back. Kishan, I'm back.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Varsha, we have almost all the cases previously discussed available in our channel. You can go through them. Okay. Don't think that you didn't have postings, you could not learn anything, nothing like that.
Yes.
So madam is back. We will just continue the class. Just listen to her, whatever she tells, all important points. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I think more or less everything has been covered. Only thing is I wanted to ask you all, how will you manage a patient with posterocapsular opacification?
So, ma'am, we can place the lens in between the iris and the capsular space. Intraocular lens.
Nd:YAG laser capsulotomy. Nd:YAG laser capsulotomy, anybody? Have you heard of Nd:YAG laser capsulotomy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you can do a YAG laser capsulotomy. So basically, I think more or less everything has been covered. Do you all have any doubts?
No, ma'am.
Okay, if you have any doubts, if you need any help, please feel free to take my phone number from Dr. Kishan, and you can leave me a text and I'll respond. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, there's a doubt on
Thank
the
you.
There's
ma'am, are you there? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm here, Ashmita.
Yes, ma'am. So actually, I was presenting the screen, so I could not go through the chat box. There's a question here that, ma'am, won't iris fix IOL cause secondary angle closure by iris Bombay?
Yeah, that I answered, no?
yes, ma'am. During discussion, you
Yeah,
answered that question.
there will usually be like a small vault for your iris claw lens. So basically, there will not be complete contact of your iris with the iris claw lens. There will be space for circulation of aqueous humor, so it will not cause iris Bombay. So for iris Bombay to occur, you should have a 360-degree posterior synechiae. That will not happen. All right, with an iris claw lens.
Ma'am, there's another doubt.
Should.
Yeah, that is, why do we do vitrectomy for children?
Okay, so in case of children, there is a high chance of opacification of the anterior hyaloid face. Okay, the anterior part of the vitreous can opacify, and that can cause media opacity, and basically that can cause a drop in vision. So it is highly recommended that in children we always do an anterior vitrectomy. You do a posterior capsulorhexis. So in addition to an anterior capsulorhexis, you do a posterior capsulorhexis. Go through that posterior capsulorhexis, clear that anterior hyaloid face, and then place the intraocular lens in the bag.
Thank you so
Okay.
much, ma'am. I guess there are no more doubts, and on the YouTube channel also there are no doubts unanswered. Ma'am, there's
Okay.
one more. Sorry.
Sure.
Why do we apply sutures for phaco in children?
Okay, so basically in children, the scleral rigidity is less, okay, compared to adults. So in children, there is no much concept of a self-sealing wound. Although the wound construction is similar, there will be a greater chance of leak post-operatively, and we don't want to take that chance. And so many times, children, we are doing the procedure under general anesthesia. So if we have to go back, the main thing is scleral rigidity, poor scleral rigidity, so we have to suture. Another thing is because we are doing it under general anesthesia, even if we have to apply a suture, then we'll have to take the child back up under general anesthesia. So I don't want to unnecessarily take the child up under general anesthesia twice. So
Very good
always
questions,
recommended to
O'Neill.
suture. Any more
Rahul
questions?
has-
Yes,
yeah,
ma'am.
Rahul.
Question: what will be the management when patient is shaking while cataract surgery?
Okay, this is like a very tough question. This is something that we face very commonly. I just ask my assistant to hold the patient's head and try and finish as early as possible.
So I think that's it, ma'am. We don't have any more questions coming up.
Okay.
Thank you so much for such an interactive session, ma'am. It was because of you we could learn so much about cataract, and it is such an important topic for all of us. A big thanks to all of you. Thank you to all the participants for their active and constant interaction. Ma'am, would you like to make any closing remarks for the presenter as well as for all of us?
So basically, your presentation was very good. Needed like a little bit of refinement. I think all you need to do is like present more cases, keeping whatever points I have told you in mind. If you have any more doubts, please feel free to reach out anytime.
Yes.
It was a pleasure being a part of this session.
It was a
Some
pleasure.
very intelligent
Thank
questions
you.
asked as well. Well presented, Varsha.
Thank you.
Madam,
Welcome.
she has not attended any ophthalmology postings. Without
Oh,
attending
so
postings,
this is like very good. This is very commendable,
yeah.
Varsha.
Now with
Thank
your
you.
inputs and in this learning, she will now attend the ophthalmology posting. Just imagine
Okay.
how would be her confidence levels. Okay,
Yes.
in an entire batch, she will do much better than her friends, everyone. She will
If
teach
for
others now.
confidence
others.
levels, all of you should take from Kishan. Okay, even I'd like to take some confidence from Kishan.
Yes.
And Ashmita, I want to tell you one thing. Vidya madam is my teacher. Okay,
Amazing, sir.
my
Amazing.
teacher, and we still remember her because she's so student friendly, and she taught us really well. Even now we remember. Okay, any ophthalmology means first we remember Vidya madam. Okay, hope I wanted the same. Everyone of you to learn from her. So when we requested her, she readily agreed, and she's with us, and she'll be taking us much more classes to come in the future. Only thing is that we need to volunteer for case presentations. Once Ashmita should present, and Varsha and others should come up with the cases. Only then we can conduct the classes. So please, I request all the students out there to come up with cases, okay, for the presentations. Thank you, Vidya ma'am, from on behalf of and all the members of White Army. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
sir.
Kishan.
Thank you for
I also
giving me this
thank
opportunity.
Varsha
It was
for
yes, sir. Thank you.
confidently presenting and volunteering. And
Yes.
Ashmita, you are
Thank
doing a great job being the core member of White Army. You are moderating, you are managing your academics, everything so well. We are really proud of you, Ashmita. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
sir. It is an opportunity for me.
Yeah, let's end the session. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Dr. Neil?